In a courtroom, your entire life can be reduced to a story, and my story, according to my soon-to-be ex-wife, was a thriller. A story about a man with a hidden temper, a man whose own son should be afraid of him. She had documents, she had a convincing performance, and she had a powerful new boyfriend who backed her every word. The judge's eyes were heavy on me. I saw the doubt. I felt the judgment. But I stayed silent. Because my job for 15 years was auditing ledgers, tracing hidden assets, and finding the single inconsistency that unravels a web of fiction, and this entire hearing was a web of fiction. They thought this was the climax, the moment they won. What they didn't realize was that for me, this was just the final audit, and I had already done my due diligence. It's a terrifying feeling. When the person you loved most tries to erase you, if you've ever felt betrayed, if you've ever had to stay silent while others lied about you, then you know why this story matters. Stay with me. You need to see how this ends. They say trust is built over years but broken in a second. For me, it wasn't a second. It was a series of tiny, almost invisible fractures. My name is Leo. For 15 years, I've been a forensic accountant. My world is one of numbers, patterns, and the quiet truth they whisper when no one else is listening. I found solace in the clarity of a balanced ledger. At home, my sanctuary was my wife Vanessa and our 9-year-old son Jacob. Our life in a quiet Connecticut suburb was my masterpiece, a perfect living balance sheet of love and security. Then the entries started to not add up. It began with the phone. Vanessa, who used to leave it buzzing on the kitchen counter while she cooked, suddenly became its guardian. It was always face down, always in her pocket, always password locked with a new complicated sequence I didn't recognize. I choked it up to a new game, a new obsession. But then came the late nights. Client dinners, she'd say, her voice a little too bright. Networking events. She was a marketing director, so it was plausible. But the receipts, they didn't match the stories. A charge for a boutique French bistro, Le Jardin. On a night she claimed she was at a corporate box event at the stadium. 2 glasses of Pinot Noir on a bill from a hotel bar when she said she was driving home alone. I'm an auditor. Discrepancies are my red flags. I didn't confront her. Confrontation without evidence is just noise. Instead, I observed. I noted the new subtle perfume that clung to her clothes when she came home. The way she'd take a shower the moment she walked through the door, even if she'd showered that morning. Her energy was different, distant, like her mind was constantly somewhere else, somewhere far from the home we had built together. The biggest crack appeared on a rainy Thursday. She said she was working late on a big presentation. Jacob was at a friend's house. The silence in our home was deafening. I did what I do best. I logged into our shared financial portal, my fingers moving with a grim professional certainty, and there it was, a charge from the Oak Room, a notoriously romantic, expensive steakhouse downtown. The timestamp 8:47 p.m., the amount for 2. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. A cold, sterile clarity washed over me. This wasn't a feeling anymore, it was data. I stood in the glow of my computer screen, the rain tapping against the window, and I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold, professional clarity. This wasn't a marital problem anymore. It was an investigation, and the subject was the woman I called my wife. Confronting her would have been satisfying, but it would have been stupid. In my line of work, you never reveal your hand until you have all the cards. It took me less than 48 hours to piece it together. His name was Gregory Sloan. Greg, to his friends. A real estate developer with a portfolio of glossy downtown condos and a smile that looked expensive. Public records showed 2 previous divorces, both messy, both seemingly advantageous to him. His digital footprint was a monument to his own success, charity galas, golf tournaments, a new black Mercedes S-Class. He was the kind of man who led with his wallet and expected the world to get out of his way. Vanessa wasn't the first, but she was mine. The following Tuesday, I came home early. Jacob was at soccer practice. The house was supposed to be empty, but Vanessa's car was in the driveway, and 2 spaces down, idling like a predator, was a black Mercedes. My blood went from cold to frozen. I didn't slam my car door. I didn't storm inside. Years of conducting sensitive audits had taught me that silence was power. I took out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. I moved through my own home like a ghost. The soft, melancholic sound of a jazz piano drifted from the living room. A pair of men's leather loafers, polished to a high shine, were placed neatly by the door. My stomach tightened. I climbed the stairs. The door to our home office was slightly ajar. Their voices drifted out, intimate and laughing. And then, the laughter stopped. The tone shifted. "Are you sure he suspects nothing?" It was Greg's voice, smooth and confident. "He's clueless," Vanessa replied, her voice laced with a dismissiveness that cut deeper than any shout. "He's buried in his spreadsheets. He lives in a world of numbers, not people. It's his greatest weakness." "Good," Greg said. "Then we stick to the plan. My lawyer, Henderson, is a shark. We paint Leo as emotionally absent, a workaholic who can't connect with his own son. We get full custody. With the child support and the asset split, we can break ground on the new property by spring. It's just business, V." "It's more than business," Vanessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's our future." I stood there, a statue in my own hallway, the phone in my hand capturing every damning word. They weren't just having an affair, they were executing a hostile takeover of my life. I had heard enough. I turned and walked back down the stairs, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet. I waited in the living room, standing calmly by the fireplace. An hour later, they descended the stairs, fully dressed, the air thick with a tension that screamed of guilt. Vanessa froze, her face turning a sickly shade of white. Greg, however, just smirked. "Leo," he said as if we were old friends, "didn't expect you back so soon." He glanced at Vanessa, then back at me. "Look, these things happen. Some people are just built for more than a quiet life in the suburbs." I looked him dead in the eye, my expression unreadable. "You have no idea what I'm built for, Greg, but you will." Vanessa tried to speak, to form some pathetic excuse, but I was already walking out the door. The rain hit my face, cold and clean. My pulse was steady. My hands were still. This wasn't the moment I lost everything. It was the moment I chose not to lose control. Leo didn't go to war without a plan, and in the quiet of the falling rain, a new one had just begun. A week later, the papers arrived. They didn't just want a divorce, they wanted an annihilation. Vanessa's lawyer painted me as an emotionally stunted workaholic, a stranger to my own son. The envelope was thick, heavy with legal malice. The filing was a masterpiece of character assassination. I was Leo the Ledger, a man more comfortable with columns of numbers than with the emotional needs of a child. They twisted my quiet nature into emotional neglect, my methodical approach to life into obsessive and controlling behavior. They petitioned for full physical and legal custody, requesting that my parenting time be supervised. Greg Sloan was presented as a stable, engaged, and nurturing presence in Jacob's life. My lawyer, a pragmatic woman named Patricia Mills, sighed as she read it. "Leo, this is aggressive. They're building a narrative, and it's a compelling one. The judge, Judge Wright, has a soft spot for the involved mother archetype. This is going to be an uphill battle." The preliminary hearing was a circus. Vanessa played her part perfectly. She sat on the stand, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek as she spoke of my coldness, my inability to be present. She claimed I'd forgotten Jacob's birthday 2 years ago because I was consumed by a case. She lied. I'd taken him to a baseball game and I had the ticket stubs and a photo of him with a foam finger to prove it. But in that moment, her fiction felt more real than my truth. Greg sat behind her wearing a suit that cost more than my car, a look of solemn support plastered on his face. To the untrained eye, he was the picture of a responsible stepfather. To me, he was an actor on stage. Patricia cross-examined gently, pointing out inconsistencies, but Vanessa held her line. She was rehearsed, polished. The judge listened intently, her eyes flicking to me with a growing sense of disapproval. During recess, I saw it, a small, telling moment. Greg leaned over, slipped a folded piece of paper into Vanessa's hand. It wasn't a love note. I saw the header, a real estate logo, an address. It was a transaction. Back in the courtroom, Patricia leaned over to me, her voice low with concern. Leo, they're building a narrative and the judge is buying it. We need a miracle. I looked back, my voice calm, barely a whisper. I'm not a miracle worker, Patricia. I'm an accountant, and I just found a discrepancy. This is the moment where most people would break. The system feels like it's rigged against you. If you've ever felt that way, hit the pause button and leave a comment with the word truth below. Let's build a community that supports each other. Miracles are unpredictable. Evidence is not. While they were building a case on sand, I started digging into their foundation. I retreated to the quiet of my temporary apartment. 3 monitors glowed in the dim light, my command center. They had tried to weaponize my greatest strength, my attention to detail, against me. Now I would turn it into my shield and my sword. I started with Greg. His empire, Sloan Holdings, looked impressive on the surface. But beneath the glossy brochures, the numbers told a different story. I cross-referenced property records with loan applications, corporate filings with SEC databases. The pattern was clear. He was dangerously over-leveraged. He had taken out a massive second mortgage on his primary residence just 3 months ago. He was pouring money into a new development, the Apex Towers, but the construction permits were stalled. The money was bleeding out. Then I found the jackpot. A buried non-public notice from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Gregory Sloan was under investigation for fraudulent misrepresentation of assets in a multi-state property fund. He had lied to his investors, and he had certainly lied to the court by not disclosing this material financial instability. I turned to Vanessa. Her sworn financial affidavit was a work of fiction. She claimed no joint assets with Greg. But a deep search of banking records, all public, if you knew where to look, revealed a joint money market account opened in both their names just 6 weeks after they met. The initial deposit was $50,000, a deposit she had not disclosed. It was perjury, plain and simple. I also noticed small, irregular expense reimbursements from her company, a few $100s here, $1,000 there, all flagged with vague descriptions like client acquisition or brand development. It was small scale, but it was embezzlement. She was stealing to keep up with Greg's lavish lifestyle. I compiled everything. The loan documents, the SEC notice, the hidden bank account statements, the suspicious expense reports. It was a neat, bulletproof dossier that exposed their house of cards. But I didn't send it to Patricia. Not yet. Submitting it would start a legal debate. It would be my word against their excuses. I needed something irrefutable. I needed a confession. Not in a legal deposition, but in the unguarded, arrogant moments where they thought no one was listening. And for that, I needed my son to be brave. I sat Jacob down. Not as a detective briefing a witness, but as a father talking to his son. Jacob, I said, people are going to say things about me that aren't true. It was the hardest conversation of my life. We were at our favorite diner, surrounded by the smell of pancakes and bacon. Jacob was pushing his fries around his plate. Your mom and I are having some big disagreements, I began, choosing my words with more care than I ever had with a financial report. And sometimes when adults disagree, they say things that aren't completely accurate. He looked up at me, his eyes, so much like his mother's, filled with confusion. You mean they lie? Yes, Jacob. Sometimes they lie. And your mom might. She might ask you to say things that aren't true about me, about us. His bottom lip trembled. Why would she do that? It's complicated, son, but I need you to know one thing, and it's the most important thing I will ever teach you. The truth matters. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The truth is what keeps us safe. I didn't ask him to spy. I didn't give him a mission. I gave him a tool and a principle. I gave him a simple, kid-friendly smartwatch. It could make calls, send texts, and yes, it had a voice recorder. If anyone ever asks you to say something you know isn't true, I told him, you have the right to remember what was actually said. This can help you remember. It's not for getting people in trouble. It's for protecting the truth. He looked at the watch, then back at me, and nodded slowly. He understood. Not the complexity of the legal battle, but the simple, profound weight of honesty. In the days that followed, I saw him withdraw. He was caught in a loyalty trap, a no man's land between two parents. It broke my heart. But I had to trust him. I had to trust the values I had instilled in him. I knew Vanessa's patterns. The final custody hearing was in 4 days. She would try to coach him one last time. She would want him perfectly rehearsed. The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed. A text from Jacob's watch. Dad, at Mom's apartment. She is talking about the court a lot. She's saying weird stuff about you. I put my phone down. My hands were steady. The trap wasn't made of wire and steel. It was made of pressure, greed, and one small brave boy with a watch on his wrist. The stage was set. The courtroom felt like a vacuum. All the air sucked out by Vanessa's lawyer's final dramatic plea to save this child from a life of emotional neglect. The air in Judge Wright's courtroom was thick enough to chew. Vanessa and her lawyer, a man named Richard Henderson with a voice like grinding gravel, had just finished their closing argument. They had presented their fabricated texts, the manipulated photo, the testimony about my coldness. Henderson painted a picture of a boy terrified of his own father, a boy who needed the warm, nurturing embrace of his mother and her new partner. Greg sat in the gallery, his arms crossed, a look of smug victory already forming on his face. Judge Wright was shuffling her papers, looking weary. It was over. I could feel it. Based on the evidence presented, the judge began, I am inclined to grant the petitioner's request for— Your Honor? Patricia Mills's voice cut through the room, clear and sharp. She stood up. Before you rule, my client has new evidence. Evidence pertaining to perjury by the petitioner and material witness, financial fraud, and a conspiracy to manipulate this court. The room erupted in murmurs. Henderson shot to his feet, objecting. Judge Wright slammed her gavel. On what grounds, Ms. Mills? On the grounds of the truth, Your Honor, Patricia said, unwavering. I call my client Leo to the stand. I walked to the stand, my posture calm, my breathing even. Under oath, I began to speak, not with emotion, but with data. I described the hidden joint bank account. I presented the documents showing Greg's SEC investigation. I outlined Vanessa's embezzlement. With each sentence, Vanessa's face grew paler. Henderson's objections grew more frantic. Greg looked like he'd been punched in the gut. The judge's weariness was replaced by a sharp, focused anger. Ms. Vanessa, she boomed. Do you care to explain this? Vanessa snapped. The carefully constructed facade crumbled. He's a hacker, a liar. He's obsessed with controlling me. He's making it all up. Ask Jacob. Jacob is terrified of him. The judge's eyes shifted to the front row where Jacob sat, small and still between a court officer and Patricia's paralegal. Son, Judge Wright said, her voice softening just a fraction. This court has heard a lot of things about your father. I need to ask you directly, are you afraid of him? The entire courtroom held its breath. Jacob stood up. He was small for a 9-year-old, but he stood tall, his shoulders back. He looked at the judge, then at his mother, then at me. I gave him the smallest, most reassuring nod I could muster. No, Your Honor, he said, his voice clear and steady, carrying in the silent room. But I am afraid of the lies. He held up his wrist, the smartwatch looking like a toy on his small arm. I have a recording of the truth. This is the moment of truth, not just for Leo, but for anyone who's been wrongly accused. If your heart is pounding right now, If you're feeling that surge of justice, remember to subscribe. You won't want to miss the final devastating conclusion. You could hear a pin drop. Then my son's voice, clear as day, filled the room. Mom, why do you want me to say Daddy ignores me? He helps me with my homework every night. The bailiff brought the watch to the judge. She plugged it into the court's audio system. A click, and then, Mom, why do you want me to say Daddy ignores me? He helps me with my homework every night. Jacob, we've been over this. The judge needs to understand that Daddy's work is more important to him than we are. He lives in his own little world. Vanessa's voice was heard clearly on the recording. But that's not true, Mom. He took me to the planetarium last weekend. Greg echoed in the background. Vanessa, for God's sake, get him on board. This is why I hired Henderson. If the kid doesn't play along, this whole thing falls apart. Just tell him to be quiet and look sad. Vanessa was heard hissing. Keep your voice down. Jacob, honey, listen. After we win, we're going to live in a beautiful new house. You'll have your own game room. Everything will be better. But the judge just needs to believe your dad is a bad father. It doesn't have to be true. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any noise. It was the sound of a meticulously constructed lie collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. Vanessa was as white as marble, her hand clamped over her mouth. Henderson had sunk into his chair, his head in his hands. Then Greg exploded. He shot to his feet, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic and rage. He pointed a shaking finger at Vanessa. You idiot! He screamed, his voice echoing in the stunned courtroom. You said the kid wasn't a problem. You had one job. In that one catastrophic outburst, he confirmed everything. The plan, the conspiracy, the utter lack of morality. He wasn't a supportive partner. He was a businessman who had just seen his investment tank. Judge Wright didn't even need to leave the bench. She looked at Greg, then at Vanessa, and her face was a mask of cold, hard justice. The gavel fell. The gavel fell. Full custody to me. The court ordered investigations into Vanessa for perjury and embezzlement, and into Greg for his financial crimes. Judge Wright's words were swift and final. She granted me full legal and physical custody of Jacob, effective immediately. She vacated all previous rulings and ordered a criminal investigation into Vanessa for perjury and witness coercion, and into Greg for his role in the conspiracy and for his SEC violations. She stated, her voice ringing with authority, "This court will not be manipulated. It will not be used as a weapon in a campaign of greed and parental alienation." Vanessa made a small choked sound and collapsed into her chair. All her poise, her perfect image was gone. She was just a woman caught in the ruins of her own making. The fallout was swift and merciless. Greg's SEC investigation became public the next day. His investors pulled out, lawsuits piled up, and his Apex Towers project was dead in the water. He declared bankruptcy within a month. Vanessa was fired from her job, and the state bar initiated disbarment proceedings. She tried to call, to text, to see Jacob, but he, with my support, wasn't ready. He told me, maybe when she learns to tell the truth. We drove home that evening, just the two of us. Jacob was quiet in the back seat, staring out the window at the passing suburbs. You okay, kiddo? I asked, reaching back to squeeze his hand. He nodded slowly. I think so. It feels like we won, but I still feel sad. I know, son, I know. I chose my words carefully. It's okay to feel sad. Sometimes winning doesn't mean cheering, it just means surviving. And you did more than that. You told the truth. That's worth everything. He was quiet for a moment. Daddy? Yeah, buddy? You didn't have to fight them like you did you? With all the numbers and stuff. I kept my eyes on the road, on the path ahead. I had to protect you, Jacob. That was the only thing that ever mattered. He nodded, satisfied, and rested his head against the window. I glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror and felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Later that night, after Jacob was asleep, I sat on the porch. The cool night air wrapped around me. I thought about the lessons of my career, patience, precision, an unwavering belief in the truth. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to break anything. I just had to be patient and let the numbers, let the truth speak for itself. Vanessa and Greg had supplied their own rope. I had simply handed it to them and watched them tie the knots. Jacob would grow up knowing what it meant to stand for something, to choose integrity, even when it was hard. He had already shown more strength than most adults I had ever met. They thought they were playing chess, moving pieces against a man too broken to fight back. But I was never the king, and I was never the pawn. I was the board. And they had been too arrogant to check for traps. What would you have done in Leo's situation? Could you have stayed that calm, that focused? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation about integrity. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and family, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We tell these stories not for revenge, but as a reminder that even in the darkest times, your character is your greatest weapon. Thanks for watching.